Welcome to Sports Love Media on YouTube. It's your guy, Sports Love. Broadcasting live today. We're going to do the Major League Baseball games for July 2nd through July 4th, 2025. My perspective, we're going to go through the games that's going to be played July 2nd through 4th. And in that, we will mention who's playing, the time it starts, the starting pitcher, and then we'll go over who I think will win the games. After that, there's some other Major League Baseball information that I want to go over that I think is pertinent. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on this. For July 2nd, you have the Athletics versus Tampa Bay, 11:10 a.m. It'll be Mitch Spence versus Ryan Pepiot. The times that I mentioned will be in Central Time. St. Louis versus Pittsburgh, 11:35 a.m. Sonny Gray versus Mitch Keller. San Diego versus Philadelphia, 12:05 p.m. Dylan Cease versus Mick Abel. Minnesota versus Miami, 5:40 p.m. Simeon Woods versus Simeon Woods Richardson versus Jameson Junk. Detroit versus Washington, 5:45 p.m. Undecided versus Mackenzie Gore. The New York Yankees versus Toronto, 6:07 p.m. Will Warren versus Jose Barrios. Cincinnati versus Boston, 6:10 p.m. Nick Martinez versus Brayan Bello. Can y'all hear me out there in YouTube land? Anyway, Milwaukee versus the New York Mets, 6:10 p.m. Jacob Missorowski versus Blade Tidwell. Los Angeles Angels versus Atlanta, 6:15 p.m. Yusei Kikuchi versus Grant Holmes. Cleveland versus Chicago Cubs, 7 p.m. Tanner Bibby versus Shota Imanaga. You have Baltimore versus Texas, 7:05 p.m. Tomoyuki Sugano versus Nathan Eovaldi. Houston versus Colorado, 7:40 p.m. Hunter Brown versus Austin Gomber. Kansas City versus Seattle, 8:40 p.m. Noah Cameron versus Logan Gilbert. You have San Francisco versus Arizona, 8:40 p.m. Landon Roop versus Merrill Kelly. The Chicago White Sox, you have the Los Angeles Dodgers. Chicago White Sox versus Los Angeles Dodgers with Sean Burke versus Clayton Kershaw. So, and hello to you, Restockable Games. I appreciate you joining me today. Okay, now that we've gone over who is playing and the starting pitchers for July 2nd, let's go over who I think will win these games. In the Athletics versus Tampa Bay game, I have the Athletics. St. Louis will defeat Pittsburgh. San Diego will defeat Philadelphia. Minnesota will defeat Miami. Detroit will defeat Washington. The New York Yankees will defeat Toronto. Cincinnati will defeat Boston. Milwaukee defeats the New York Mets. Los Angeles Angels wins over Atlanta. Chicago Cubs loses to Cleveland. Baltimore wins over Texas. Houston wins over Colorado. Kansas City defeats Seattle. San Francisco versus Arizona. I have San Francisco winning that one. Chicago White Sox defeats the Los Angeles Dodgers. Hello, A-Day Flame. Hello again to each of you. How are you today? So, moving on to July 3rd of 2025, you have Minnesota versus Miami, 11:10 a.m. with David Festa versus Yuri Perez. You have Houston versus Colorado, 2:10 p.m. Brandon Waster versus Kyle Freeland. Detroit versus Washington, 5:45 p.m. Dietrich N versus Jake Irvin. The New York Yankees versus Toronto, 6:07 p.m. Clark Schmidt versus Chris Massett. Milwaukee versus the New York Mets, 6:10 p.m. Jose Quintavia versus David Peterson. Los Angeles Angels versus Atlanta, 6:15 p.m. Jose Soriano versus Bryce Elder. You have Cleveland versus the Chicago Cubs, 7:05 p.m. Luis Ortiz versus Cade Horton. San Francisco versus Arizona, 8:40 p.m. Robbie Ray versus Brandon Pfaadt. Chicago White Sox versus the Los Angeles Dodgers, 9:10 p.m. Aaron Savale versus Dustin May. Kansas City versus Seattle, Seth Lugo versus Brian Wu. Hello to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining me today. For the games on July 3rd, here are my picks. I have Miami defeats Minnesota, Houston defeats Colorado, Washington defeats Detroit, Toronto defeats the New York Yankees, the New York Mets defeats Milwaukee, Atlanta wins over the Los Angeles Angels, Chicago Cubs defeats Cleveland, Arizona defeats San Francisco, Los Angeles Dodgers will defeat the Chicago White Sox, Seattle defeats Kansas City. Okay, so next game we have is on July 4th of 2025. You have Boston versus Washington, which will be at 10:05 a.m. Lucas Giolito versus Michael Soroka. Cincinnati versus Philadelphia, 12:05 p.m. Andrew Abbott versus Jesus Luzardo. St. Louis versus Chicago Cubs, 1:20 p.m. Miles McCollis versus Colin Ray. The New York Yankees versus the New York Mets, 2:10 p.m. Marcus Stroman versus Paul Blackburn. Tampa Bay versus Minnesota, 3:10 p.m. Bailey Falter versus Luis Castillo. Pittsburgh versus Seattle, 3:10 p.m. Bailey Falter versus Luis Castillo. I'm sorry, I don't have that one. Versus undecided, do not know. Sorry, I messed up there. Texas versus San Diego, you have 5:40 p.m. Kunar Rocker versus Randy Vasquez. Los Angeles Angels versus Toronto, 6:07 p.m. Kyle Hendricks versus Eric Lauer. Detroit versus Cleveland, 6:10 p.m. Casey Mize versus Slade Ciccone. Milwaukee versus Miami, 6:10 p.m. Quinn Priestler versus Sandy Alcantara. Baltimore versus Atlanta, you have Charlie Morton versus Spencer Schwellenbach. 6:15 p.m. is that game. Chicago White Sox versus Colorado, 7:20 p.m. Adrian Hauser versus Antonio Senzatella. Houston versus the Los Angeles Dodgers, 8:10 p.m. Lance McCullers Jr. versus undecided. You have Kansas City versus Arizona, 8:40 p.m. Chris Bubik versus Eduardo Rodriguez. San Francisco versus Athletics, 9:05 p.m. Justin Verlander versus J.P. Spears. So, for the games on July 4th of 2025, my picks are as follows. I have Boston defeating Washington. I have Cincinnati defeating Philadelphia. St. Louis defeats Chicago Cubs. The New York Yankees defeats the New York Mets. Tampa Bay defeats Minnesota. Pittsburgh defeats Seattle. Texas will defeat San Diego. Los Angeles Angels will defeat Toronto. Detroit will defeat Cleveland. Milwaukee defeats Miami. Baltimore defeats Atlanta. Chicago White Sox will actually beat Colorado. Houston will defeat the Los Angeles Dodgers. Kansas City will defeat Arizona. San Francisco will defeat the Athletics. So let's review one more time, shall we, for who I have to win these games. For the games July 2nd, 2025, the Athletics defeats Tampa Bay, St. Louis defeats Pittsburgh, San Diego defeats Philadelphia, Minnesota defeats Miami, Detroit defeats Washington, the New York Yankees defeats Toronto, Cincinnati will defeat Boston, Milwaukee defeats the New York Mets, Los Angeles Angels defeats Atlanta, Cleveland defeats Chicago Cubs, Baltimore defeats Texas, Houston defeats Colorado, Kansas City wins over Seattle. San Francisco will defeat Arizona. Chicago White Sox will defeat the Los Angeles Dodgers. Yes, I know that's a rare call, but that's what it is. For July 3rd, my picks are as follows. Miami defeats Minnesota. Houston defeats Colorado. Washington defeats Detroit. Toronto defeats the New York Yankees. The New York Mets will defeat Milwaukee. Atlanta defeats the Los Angeles Angels. Chicago Cubs defeats Cleveland. Arizona will defeat San Francisco. The Los Angeles Dodgers defeats the Chicago White Sox. And Seattle will defeat Kansas City. Now, we have for July 4th, I again have Boston defeating Washington. Cincinnati defeats Philadelphia. St. Louis defeats Chicago Cubs. The New York Yankees defeats the New York Mets. Tampa Bay defeats Minnesota. Pittsburgh defeats Seattle. Texas will defeat San Diego. Los Angeles Angels will defeat Toronto. Detroit will defeat Cleveland. Milwaukee will defeat Miami. Baltimore defeats Atlanta. The Chicago White Sox defeats Colorado. Houston will defeat the Los Angeles Dodgers. Kansas City will defeat Arizona, and San Francisco will defeat the Athletics. So those are my picks for July 2nd through 4th of 2025. Now, moving on to other Major League Baseball stuff. Here are the records in terms of wins and losses for Major League Baseball teams, and these records are accurate as of the end of the games that were played on June 30th of 2025. The New York Yankees, 48 wins, 35 losses. Tampa Bay Rays, 47 wins, 38 losses. Toronto Blue Jays, 46 wins, 38 losses. Boston Red Sox, 42 wins, 44 losses. Baltimore Orioles, 37 wins, 47 losses. Detroit Tigers, 53 wins, 32 losses. Cleveland Guardians, 40 wins, 42 losses. Minnesota Twins, 40 wins, 44 losses. Kansas City Royals, 39 wins, 46 losses. Chicago White Sox, 28 wins, 56 losses. Houston Astros, 50 wins, 34 losses. Seattle Mariners, 44 wins, 40 losses. Los Angeles Angels, 41 wins, 42 losses. Texas Rangers, 41 wins, 44 losses. The Athletics, 35 wins, 52 losses. Philadelphia Phillies, 50 wins, 35 losses. The New York Mets, 48 wins, 37 losses. Atlanta Braves, 38 wins, 45 losses. Miami Marlins, 37 wins, 45 losses. Washington Nationals, 35 wins, 49 losses. Chicago Cubs, 49 wins, 35 losses. Milwaukee Brewers, 47 wins, 37 losses. St. Louis Cardinals, 47 wins, 39 losses. The Cincinnati Reds, 44 wins, 41 losses. Pittsburgh Pirates, 36 wins, 50 losses. Los Angeles Dodgers, 53 wins, 32 losses. San Diego Padres, 45 wins, 39 losses. San Francisco Giants, 45 wins, 40 losses. Arizona Diamondbacks, 42 wins, 42 losses. The Colorado Rockies, 19 wins and 65 losses. Does anybody have any questions regarding what we've gone over so far in Major League Baseball discussion today? Because that's all the games I have. That's all the win-loss records and stuff. So thank you again for tuning in to this live stream today. I do greatly appreciate it very much. If you will, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware of when I'm doing these live streams, when I have breaking news in the sports world, when I have sports action videos, when I have sports education videos, and when I have breaking news in the sports world. If you wish to subscribe to the YouTube channel, it would be greatly appreciated. You can go to www.youtube.com, the slash symbol, the at symbol, SPORTSLOV, or you can go to the YouTube search tab and type in Bob Amin. That's BOBAMIN. You'll know it's me because I have Sports Love Media burned into a basketball as my avatar. I'm also on the Twitter X area, and my handle there is at BobAmin16. That is the at symbol, BOBAMIN16. Just to let you know, we will be doing more of these Major League Baseball live streams as I'm able to do so. There will be some more sports action videos coming up. When those come out, I'll let you know when I'm going to do those. Let's see. We will be continuing to do some go-kart racing when it comes to me broadcasting live for that. And there will be other live streams where appropriate and whenever I'm able to do so. So, if there's no questions, thank you again for tuning in today. I'm Bob Amin with Sports Love Media. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. I'm signing out now. Thank you.